Here is how to dominate a fantasy football draft from the back half of the draft order in 2025. There is arguably no better feeling in fantasy football than when you land an absolute steal. You get my 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Dominator, which is jam-packed with strategy and analysis for 250 plus players. And he's been strong in fantasy football. He's averaging over 18 fantasy points per game over 25 career games where he's played at least 73% of the offensive snaps. 2025 week winner, formerly known as the heat map. So you can conquer start-sit dilemmas, find plug-and-play streamers, and dominate your weekly matchups with this one-of-a-kind resource, Discord community, where you can get personalized advice from 180 plus and counting sharp fantasy football minds that are helping each other dominate. 365 days of elite fantasy football analysis, resources, and Discord community. What's up, my friend? It's Mikey Henninger from Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, and welcome back to this mock draft series where I'm using settings and scenarios submitted by real members of Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Now, if you missed our last episode, we did a mock draft from the number one spot in a 12-team PPR league with 2 flex spots. That episode was chock full of roster construction insights, player analysis, and a heck of a lot more, so be sure to check that one out either now or when you're done with this episode. Now, today's mock draft is dedicated to BBFF member Alex, who sent me the following email. I'd love to request that one of the next mock draft episodes to be from pick number 7. I'm curious to see the strategy here, and it seems like an awkward spot to me. I am in a 10-person league that starts 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex, 1 defense, 1 kicker. It's a PPR league with 7 bench spots and 1 IR. What's the strategy? Let's dive in. There's 2 key pieces of Alex's league setup that should have a major influence on the way that we draft and the way that we construct our team. Now, for starters, while some leagues start 3 wide receivers and multiple flex spots like the mock draft we just did in our last episode, Alex's league only starts 2 wide receivers with just 1 flex spot. Now, that means that there's less of an opportunity and really less of a demand to build your team around wide receiver. And while I would stop short of saying wide receivers become devalued because they're still insanely important, this format does make it more critical that you nail your picks at quarterback and tight end. You see, because you don't have 4 or even 5 different wide receivers to stack up your production in your lineup, you have much less room for error when it comes to quarterbacks or tight ends that don't perform. In other words, you can overcome a quarterback or a tight end dud in leagues that have 6 or maybe even 7 different running backs or wide receivers going in your lineup every single week. But it's much harder to overcome a quarterback or tight end dud when you have just 5 combined running backs / wide receivers going in your lineup. So while I wouldn't say that wide receivers are quote unquote devalued in this format, I would say that quarterbacks and tight ends matter a heck of a lot more than they usually do in a larger league, which leads me to my next point. The second key piece of Alex's setup is that this league is a 10-team league with just 16 roster spots each, and that's including kickers and defenses. In other words, if there's 10 teams, each of them will have a maximum of 14 total quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. That means a maximum of just 140 total quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends will be on rosters, while the rest of them will be on waivers every single week. And even that is assuming some folks don't roster more than 1 defense and or kicker, which I bet some of them will, even though they certainly shouldn't. Now, for comparison, our last episode, like I mentioned, was a 12-team league with 16 roster spots and no kickers, which means 180 quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends will be rostered. 180 versus 140 is a pretty massive difference. So to put this all another super simple way, the ultimate point that I'm trying to get to here is that the waiver wire is going to be absolutely loaded in Alex's league this year. And that matters when we're establishing our draft strategy. You see, knowing that we can actually use the waiver wire to our advantage during the season, assuming we do it right, then we can use our draft picks to build a stable foundation and nail the less replaceable positions. Now, if you listened to episode 60, you know that I'm all about using the waiver wire to land plug-and-play running backs during the season. And if you did not listen to episode 60, I highly recommend pressing pause on this episode and doing that right now before we continue, because this episode will make a heck of a lot more sense along the way. But the TLDR, too long didn't read, if you know what you're doing, it's much easier to land a plug-and-play RB2 or even an RB1 off the waiver wire than it is to find a plug-and-play wide receiver or tight end. So, what does that mean for how we're going to build this roster? Well, knowing that nailing quarterback and tight end in small leagues is key, while finding plug-and-play running backs off waivers will be easier than usual in a loaded waiver wire pool, we want to build this particular team around wide receivers while hopefully landing an elite quarterback and an elite tight end along the way. Let's see how it goes. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A forge master? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech, that's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. All right, we are officially on the clock with our first pick in this mock draft for Alex. We're pick number 7 overall. And as you can see here on the draft board, the first 6 picks went Saquon Barkley, Justin Jefferson, Bijan Robinson, Jamar Chase went number 4, so Merry Christmas to that person. Derrick Henry went 5, Jahmyr Gibbs went number 6, and I already have a pretty difficult decision to make, which is exactly why I built the 2025 Draft Dominator to begin with, which is exactly what you see here on the screen. It's exactly what you're looking at. Now, this is a resource that myself and hundreds of BBFF members use to outsmart their league mates and dominate their drafts. It's backed by hundreds and hundreds of hours of research and well over 1,000 real money drafts that I've already done here this year in 2025. You'll see here that there's tiers to identify similarly grouped players that could be flip-flopped in the rankings pretty easily. You'll see rankings for when you need to split hairs and you just can't decide on 2 guys. I do have them ranked top to bottom for you. And you'll see detailed player analysis and 2025 season previews for 240 quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends, and a heck of a lot more in this 2025 Draft Dominator that I'm sure we're going to cover plenty in today's episode. Now, I've already updated the Dominator for pick 7. We're the 7th pick in a 10-team league. I've already deleted the first 6 guys that were drafted, and now it's time for me to make that decision of who do I take at pick number 7 overall. Now, remember the general strategy and the general philosophy that we're entering this draft with, right? It could certainly change as this draft goes on. We want to make sure that we're fluid and flexible as the draft board falls to us in any which way. But going into this draft, we want to build this team while prioritizing wide receivers and hopefully landing an elite tight end and elite quarterback early, which that actually works out pretty well to start with when you look at the Draft Dominator, because you'll see all that's left in the best remaining tier is a bunch of high-quality, high-upside wide receivers, and I can basically have my choice of different elite wide receiver 1 options. Now, I certainly could just go ahead and grab Malik Nabers. He's literally the highest ranked available player in my rankings. Nobody would fight me or argue with me if I took the guy that I have ranked the highest, right? I could end the conversation right here and take Malik Nabers. But this is actually a really great example of why it really helps to pay attention to the ADP, the average draft position of the platform that you're playing on. For instance, you will see here that CeeDee Lamb is, while Malik Nabers is the highest ranked in my Draft Dominator, CeeDee Lamb is the next highest drafted player. His ADP is right about now. His ADP is about 6.2, so we're getting him at a 1-pick discount. Meanwhile, you go down a little bit, you'll see Malik Nabers' ADP, average draft position, is about 10.7 or about 11, which is theoretically closer to my next pick, which is pick 14 overall, than it is to this pick, which is pick 7 overall. So theoretically, Malik Nabers is going right around here according to ADP. Now, that means that there is a non-zero chance that Malik Nabers makes it back to me at 14 overall. Now, I want to be crystal clear here. I'm not saying that's a likely scenario. I'm not saying it's likely I'm going to get Malik Nabers in the second round, but it is possible. And if I'm basically dead even on Malik Nabers versus CeeDee Lamb to begin with, which is the entire purpose of having tiers in the first place, then why not just grab CeeDee Lamb here and roll the dice and try and hit the lottery in the second round? Again, nobody's saying it's likely, but there is a chance. So instead of splitting hairs on, do I go with CeeDee Lamb? Do I go with Malik Nabers? Which of those two guys should I choose? Instead of wasting all the time and energy of splitting hairs on those guys that could easily be flip-flopped in the rankings, why not swing for the fences and try and land both of them? That is how you maximize upside. Now, if you really, really, really want to split hairs on these two guys, all you need to do in the 2025 Draft Dominator is click enter or double click on that player's analysis box, and you'll be able to read their analysis and their 2025 season previews for the upcoming season. So we're going to take CeeDee Lamb with this pick, and I'll just give you a quick idea of what's in the analysis box when clicking on those names. Bottom line, CeeDee Lamb is an elite wide receiver 1 with overall wide receiver 1 upside in any given week, any given season. In 26 career games in Brian Schottenheimer's offensive system, where he played at least 30 offensive snaps, and Dak Prescott threw 20-plus pass attempts. Seriously, that's the type of research I do here. I'm looking for offensive scheme, how many snaps they played in that scheme with the quarterback that they're going to be playing with. It's all situational. It's all contextual analysis. In those 26 games where he played 30 offensive snaps in Schottenheimer's offense and Dak Prescott threw at least 20 passes, CeeDee Lamb is averaging 22-plus PPR points and nearly 11 targets per game. He has a really safe floor. He's scoring 15-plus PPR points in 75% of the games that he plays in. He has a weak winning ceiling, scoring 40 or more PPR points 10% of the time. Vegas sportsbooks have him pegged for about 1,200 receiving yards and about 7.5 receiving touchdowns. Now, it is worth noting that the Dallas Cowboys did trade for George Pickens this season, and that's a pretty significant addition to the team's wide receiver room. But that being said, CeeDee Lamb remains the clear alpha. Fantasy managers should not be worried about Pickens leaving too much of a dent in CeeDee Lamb's floor or ceiling. The sky remains the limit for CeeDee Lamb, and I'm not hesitating for a second to grab him with the first pick here. Well, let's pray that this is exactly how it works out for Alex, right? That is why you roll the dice. That's why instead of wasting your time, wasting your energy, splitting hairs between two guys that could be flipped and flopped every single minute of every single hour, play the ADP game. Look at how things could land. Look how things could fall. Look how you could swing for the fences. Have a backup plan. Know what you're going to do if things don't break right. But here we are back on the clock in the second round, pick 14 overall. And there's Malik Nabers staring at us right in the face, meaning This is going to be the quickest pick of all time. No need to even think about this. Malik Nabers is the highest ranked available player in my Draft Dominator. He is in a tier of his own in terms of players that are left in that tier. We are going to go ahead and take Malik Nabers. All right, we are back on the clock in the third round. This is pick number 27 overall. We already have CeeDee Lamb and Malik Nabers holding down our wide receiver room. God, that's gorgeous. And here we have a lot of really good lessons to discuss here with this very specific pick. Now, for starters, this is a great, perfect example of why you should use your fantasy football resources as a guide, not as the Bible, not as something that you must do. Instead, use it to help you make decisions, but don't feel like your fantasy football resources are something that you have to go top to bottom in the rankings or you're going to have a bad team, right? This is not a Bible. It's definitely a guide. You see, my first instinct when I saw that the way that this draft board fell was to smash that draft button on Trey McBride here. And why not? Because Trey Bride is the third highest ranked player remaining in the Draft Dominator. He's in the currently best available tier. He checks that elite tight end box that we were looking for when we initially entered this draft. But this is also a great example of why we should A, use tiers when we're drafting and we're making our draft decisions, and B, why we should once again pay attention to the ADP on the site that we're playing on. You see, in the Draft Dominator, George Kittle is neck and neck with Trey McBride in my Draft Dominator. And if you were to read the player analysis and the 2025 season preview for George Kittle, you will see clear as day why I think he has a legitimate shot to finish as the number one tight end in all of fantasy football this year. That's why I have him neck and neck with Trey McBride. So for all intents and purposes, I am treating George Kittle as an elite tight end right next to Trey McBride this year. And on Sleeper here, you'll see that George Kittle usually goes somewhere around pick 37 or 38 overall, which means there is a decent chance he's going to be available with my next pick at 34 overall. So while I'm totally fine with smashing Trey McBride here, why not once again play that ADP game, target somebody else with this pick, and then target George Kittle in the fourth round? But who? Now again, this is where we go back to that part right in the beginning where I said you should use your fantasy football resources as a guide, not as the Bible, right? Theoretically, the Draft Dominator is telling me I should take Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams here. That's not what we're going to do. That's not what makes sense for where we're at in this draft. That's not what makes sense for this league. You see, it's rare for me to hop out of the current best available tier. It's rare for me to hop out of this tier to reach for a player that's in one of these next available tiers. It's also rare for me to draft a quarterback in round 3 of a fantasy football draft. That's something I very rarely do. Like less than 10% of the time am I taking a quarterback in round 3. But this is why it is endlessly critical to study your league settings and draft with your league settings in mind. Way in the beginning of this episode, we talked about the league settings and how it might lead us to build a team around elite wide receivers while trying to land an elite tight end and an elite quarterback along the way. And here we are with a chance to draft a top 2 quarterback in Lamar Jackson with CeeDee Lamb and Malik Nabers already in place. And when I consider the league settings, this is one of those rare instances where I am going to reach out of the best available tier. This is one of those rare instances where I am going to draft a quarterback in the 3rd round, all while playing the ADP game and targeting my elite tight end in round 4. Let's grab Lamar Jackson and let's keep this thing rolling. What's up, my fellow fantasy football nerds? If you're looking to dominate your league from start to finish and win cool prizes along the way, it's time to join the Basement Brood Fantasy Football family. As a member, you're going to get our brand new 2025 Draft Dominator, which is your ultimate guide with tiers, rankings, and season previews for over 280 players to make sure you walk out of your draft with the best team in the league. And that's only the beginning. You're also going to get our 2025 Week Winner, which gives you contextual matchup analysis for every single player in every single game, every single week, so that you can conquer those difficult start-sit dilemmas and dominate your weekly matchups. And let's not forget our amazing Discord community, which is a family of passionate fantasy football players sharing strategy, workshopping dilemmas, and helping each other dominate 24/7, 365. Plus, if that wasn't enough, every single month you're automatically entered into our autographed jersey giveaway. It truly is a no-brainer if you want to take your fantasy game to the next level, have the most fun you've ever had playing this game, and support a small but mighty business along the way. Sign up today for just $69 for an entire year. Seriously. That's 365 days of total domination, community, and giveaways for less than your last bar tab. Join the BBFF family right now using the link that we left for you in the description of this episode. I'll see you inside. And voila, there he is. We are back on the clock in the fourth round. This is pick 34 overall, and George Kittle is still available, which was the plan all along. Let's go ahead and grab George Kittle here and keep this ball rolling. All right, we are back on the clock in round number 5. This is pick number 47 overall. We already have CeeDee Lamb and Malik Nabers holding down our wide receiver room. We have our elite quarterback number 1 in Lamar Jackson. We have our elite tight end in George Kittle. And quite frankly, for the remainder of the season, let alone the remainder of this draft, we're not even going to bother thinking about tight end. We're not even going to bother thinking about quarterback. We have our guys that are locked in. Instead, we are going to continue building this draft, building this roster around wide receivers and a lot of running backs the rest of the way. In fact, much like we can and should assume that Lamar Jackson and George Kittle are locked in to our lineup every single week, regardless of situation, regardless of matchup, those guys are locked into our lineup. Malik Nabers and CeeDee Lamb are elite floor, high ceiling options where we should assume they will be locked in to our weekly lineup as well. Meaning the only spots that we have left to solve for every week from here on out are both running back spots and our flex spot. And of course, kicker and defense, but we'll get to that. Now, I understand if you're watching, there might be some heartburn or your heart might be beating pretty fast when you realize we have 0 running backs after 4 rounds. I get that. And I understand that there's, especially if you're subscribing to the old school of fantasy football where you feel like you must get running backs early. But take a deep breath. I promise it's going to be okay, especially in shallow leagues like this one, a 10-team league that only starts 2 wide receivers, has a kicker, has a defense. I promise you, we are going to find some running backs. Having done well over 1,000 drafts already this year, and knowing that the waiver wire pool for this particular league is going to be absolutely loaded, I'm overly confident that we are going to be able to find several high upside running backs in this draft and during the season. So we'll get to running backs pretty soon, I promise. But for now, I cannot pass up the best available player who's all alone in the best remaining tier, a guy that I have ranked number 34 overall, which is about 13 picks ago, considering that this is pick number 47, DJ Moore. And of course, if you want to know why I'm high on DJ Moore this year, as always, you can click enter on this box. You can double click on the player analysis box. But for the sake of time, let's hammer that draft button on DJ Moore and keep this thing moving. Okie dokie, we are back on the clock. This is round 6, pick number 54 overall. We got CeeDee Lamb, Malik Nabers, and DJ Moore holding down our wide receiver room. We got Lamar Jackson locked in as QB1. We got George Kittle locked in as tight end number 1. And finally, my friends, it's time. It's time for our first running back. Now, you'll see after I picked DJ Moore, James Conner, David Montgomery went, James Conner would have been one of my top targets in that range, but he is not available. However, flip over here to the 2025 Draft Dominator, and it kind of worked out beautifully because you'll see that the best available player in my rankings is Chuba Hubbard. I always want to say Chuba. It just sounds more fun, but Chuba Hubbard is the best available, highest ranked player in my rankings. Although I got to say, I am a big fan of DeAndre Swift this year, particularly at cost, particularly at value. There's a lot of upside there if he can stick around in the Bears offense. I have an absurd 27% exposure rate to DeAndre Swift in my best ball leagues this year. However, I'm pretty optimistic that we have a chance to get DeAndre Swift later. I was scrolling through the ADP here on Sleeper, and he's going somewhere around pick 71. So I think we're going to have a chance to get him later. Let's just let him fly and come back to him maybe in the next round. Zay Flowers would be an option. Xavier Worthy. Calvin Ridley. I really like Calvin Ridley this year with Cam Ward. But the way that our roster is currently being built, when you consider roster construction, we're pretty strong at wide receiver. Malik Nabers, CeeDee Lamb, those guys are going to be locked in every single week. DJ Moore is going to be in there most weeks, maybe not a lock in every single week, but really what we want to do is start grabbing those RB2s that are capable of RB1 weeks. So when you think about Chuba Hubbard, again, you can always click on the analysis tab to see how I feel about Chuba Hubbard, what to expect from him in 2025. But as far as backfield competition goes, it's pretty much Rico Dowdle, Trevor Etienne, and that's about it. Chuba's walking into this season with a pretty high potential for a lot of different touches. I'm more than happy to scoop him up as our RB1 after the rest of this team that we've already built out so far. So let's go ahead and grab Chuba and see what the board brings us in round 7. Alrighty, we are back on the clock in round 7. This is going to be pick number 67 overall, and the draft board fell to us in exactly the way that we would have hoped, right? We were looking at DeAndre Swift with our last pick. We decided to play that ADP game. Candidly, I would be fine with somebody taking DeAndre Swift over Chuba Hubbard in 2025 fantasy football drafts. I'm fine with either guy, really, but the fact that DeAndre Swift is still available, as is Calvin Ridley. Again, I would love Calvin Ridley, but it's time to go ahead and take DeAndre Swift off the board. He's going to be our RB2. Let's keep moving. All right, we are back on the clock in round 8. This is pick number 74. Let's do a quick recap of how the team's looking so far. At quarterback, we got Lamar Jackson locked and loaded each and every week. At wide receiver, we got CeeDee Lamb, Malik Nabers, and then we got DJ Moore in the flex spot. We got George Kittle playing tight end, and at running back, we've started to build that room out around Chuba Hubbard and DeAndre Swift. Now, with this pick, this is once again a really good example that we were talking about not too long ago about using your fantasy football resources as a guide, not as a Bible, right? If you look solely at the rankings of my 2025 Draft Dominator currently as it stands in this draft, you'll see that we're hitting a stretch of wide receivers that my Draft Dominator really likes, Calvin Ridley being chief among them. I'd really like to take Calvin Ridley here, but given the way that we've built out this roster so far, we need to keep roster construction in mind and need to keep how the weeks are going to play out moving forward. For example, week 1, week 2, week 3 rolls around, we can safely, aside from injury, we can safely assume Lamar Jackson's going to be locked in QB1, George Kittle's going to be locked in tight end 1, Malik Nabers and CeeDee Lamb are going to be wide receivers 1 and 2, and most weeks, DJ Moore is going to be a good bet for that flex spot. But at running back, that's where our team is quote-unquote the weakest, right? That's where we're going to have to make some weekly decisions. And when you have to make decisions, you want to have options, right? We don't necessarily want to throw Chuba Hubbard or DeAndre Swift in every single week. Instead, we want to start stacking up on running backs and be able to target and play matchups where we can. So again, this is one of those rare instances where I am actually going to skip out of the next several tiers. I'm going to pass on Calvin Ridley. I don't want to. I wouldn't mind having him to play matchups against DJ Moore, but when I consider roster construction, we're going to keep it locked in at running back here. We're going to skip the next tier, which is Chris Olave and Rome Odunze. I like both of those guys a lot, particularly Chris Olave. We're going to skip out on Diggs, Jerry Jeudy, Jacoby Myers, who's a guy I'm really high on this year, and we're going to go the unsexy route with Tony Pollard. Now, there's nothing at all that's sexy about this. Candidly, I was really hoping we would be able to get Quinshon Judkins here, but I got sniped the very second it got back to me. But there's nothing wrong with grabbing Tony Pollard. It's not sexy, it's not flashy, but he is a solid RB2 that we will be able to pick and choose the matchups that we play him in. Now, speaking of matchups, I will go ahead and pull up my flagship resource at Basement Brood Fantasy Football. This is literally the resource that started this entire business. It used to be called the Heat Map, which is what you're seeing on the screen, which is what you're looking at right now. I've since rebranded it. It is now called the Week Winner because that's a bit more accurate of a description. It literally helps you win your week and conquer some of your start-sit decisions. But when we have guys like Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, and Tony Pollard, and we can only play 2 of them, you can already guarantee we're going to walk into several weeks and we're going to be like, man, which 2 of these 3 guys do we want to start? We're not going to have any of those guys locked in like the same way that we're going to have Lamar Jackson locked in or CeeDee Lamb locked in. It's going to be the sort of thing where we are going to have to make a decision. Do we want to go with DeAndre Swift and Chuba Hubbard, or Chuba Hubbard and Tony Pollard, or Tony Pollard and DeAndre Swift? We're going to have some difficult decisions to make, and that's where this particular resource, the Week Winner, comes into play. Any player that you're considering for your lineup and you're trying to make a critical lineup decision, you come in each and every single week, double click on their name, and you're going to get a preview of what to expect from that player in their upcoming game of that week. This example that we're looking at right now is week 13, but that's just a random example that I pulled up. There's going to be a new week winner in week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. I've already started working on week 1, but it's contextual matchup analysis for literally every single player in every single game, every single week, so that when you're coming in and saying, which guy do I leave on the bench between Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, and Tony Pollard, this resource helps you make that decision with confidence. But back to the pick, we're going to go ahead and take Tony Pollard. There's nothing sexy about it, but it does give us an option in the running back room, which at this stage of the draft, that's really all we're looking for. We're looking to have options that we can put in the running back room because we know it's going to be CeeDee Lamb, Malik Nabers, Lamar Jackson, and George Kittle, and DJ Moore that are carrying our team. So let's get the serviceable safety, let's get the serviceable numbers in Tony Pollard, and let's keep this thing moving. If you're ready for a real challenge, you got to check out Gonzo Sports. I had a chance to meet the guys behind it, 3 longtime players who loved Gonzo so much that they purchased it in 2021 to keep it going. You see, Gonzo's been around since 1983 with a one-of-a-kind scoring system that's not your typical PPR league. In fact, this thing will test even the most seasoned of fantasy football veterans. And the community? Incredible. You see, some leagues have been running for 30 plus years. We're talking real rivalries, deep strategy, and fantasy managers who treat it like it's a second job in a good way. Drafts start on August 21st, so sign up now at gonzosports.com using promo code BBFF at checkout for $50 off your first dynasty. All right, we are back on the clock. This is round 9, which makes this pick number 87. As for roster construction, we have our locked and loaded QB1, we have our locked and loaded TE1, we got 3 wide receivers, we got 3 running backs. Now, the wide receivers are significantly more valuable with Malik Nabers, CeeDee Lamb, DJ Moore, as opposed to Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, and Tony Pollard. So for the remainder of this draft, we are going to still be hammering running backs. But before we do that, I do want to grab 1, maybe 2 more wide receivers that could be valuable in the flex on those weeks where maybe DJ Moore has a bad matchup, doesn't land particularly well in the heat map and or aka week winner. And this is actually a pretty good example, pretty good opportunity to do that. Now, candidly, I was really hoping we could get Jacoby Myers here. That didn't happen. He went 2 picks before it got back to us. It got really, really close to getting Jacoby Myers. But you'll see here in the Draft Dominator, I do still have 1 player left in the best remaining tier, and that player is a wide receiver in Stephon Diggs, the unquestioned wide receiver 1 in an ascending, getting better New England Patriots offense. Should be a nice PPR-specific weapon for Drake May. And if that offense does, in fact, take a step forward, Diggs could surprise a lot of people this year. So I have him ranked 64th in my rankings, and we're getting him at pick 87. So pretty nice steal here to grab our 4th wide receiver before we start to hammer running backs the rest of the way. All right, we are back on the clock in the 10th round. This is pick number 94 overall. And to give you a sense of where my head is at moving forward, we have one quarterback locked and loaded. That's Lamar Jackson. We got one tight end locked and loaded. That's George Kittle. Like I mentioned a couple rounds ago, we're not even going to we're not even going to look at quarterbacks or tight ends the rest of the way. You can basically delete them from the Draft Dominator if you wanted to. As for wide receivers, we spent the 2 most expensive picks that we have on wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb, Malik, Nabers. We should bet that those guys are locking up our wide receiver 1 and our wide receiver 2 spot. The only spots that are really in question with our starting lineup is who are we going to put in the flex? Is it going to be DJ Moore? Is it going to be Stephon Diggs? Or is it going to be one of our wide receivers? Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard. We have a lot of different options there. But knowing that we are elite at quarterback, elite at tight end, elite at wide receiver, and knowing that we only have, 5 bench spaces left, we are going to be hammering running back the rest of the way. Maybe one wide receiver. In fact, I got to admit, we are at a spot in the draft where while the wide receivers are starting to fall off a cliff a little bit, I do still really like Matthew Golden. I like Ricky Pearsall at this stage of the draft, but we're going to go ahead and skip on those guys, knowing that running back is the room that we need to beef up. Now, one thing I will note is that we are still in a range where there are some running backs that are useful immediately in week 1. But sooner rather than later, we are going to hit a stretch of running backs that are going to be more bench stashes than they are considerations for our week 1, week 2 roster. And we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for now, knowing that we're still trying to beef up our running back room, we're going to go ahead and skip out of tier 11, which is Matthew Golden, Ricky Pearsall, Juwan Jennings. We're going to skip out of tier 12, which is Jaden Reed, and we're going to slide right into tier 13, where I see some running backs that I really like, particularly this guy. Jaylen Warren is a guy that I'm going to have a lot of on my fantasy football teams this year. He's being drafted behind Caleb Johnson, and it's entirely possible that Jaylen Warren starts and finishes the season as Pittsburgh's RB1 as they work Caleb Johnson into the mix. But now you're taking a guy like Jaylen Warren, a proven pass catcher, a better pass blocker, at least at this stage in their careers, than Caleb Johnson. You put him in Aaron Rodgers' offense. That is a great pick to get in the 10th round if you've essentially started this draft 0 RB, which is what we did. We didn't even take our first running back until, the 6th round, and now we can get Jaylen Warren. That's exactly the type of guy that you want to get at this stage of the draft if you've built heavily around quarterbacks, tight ends, and wide receivers. Jaylen Warren is a great, great get right here, right now. All right, we're back on the clock in round 11. This is pick 107 overall, and quite frankly, this is going to be one of our easiest decisions of the draft. There's no real decision here. We already talked about how much we're wanting to stock up on running backs, and as you'll see, in the next best available tier of the 2025 Draft Dominator, there's quite literally only one running back in that tier, and that guy is Jordan Mason. Plenty of upside to Jordan Mason in the 11th round this year, who might not even be the RB2 in Minnesota. It's rumored that he might be the RB1B, like Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason might be splitting. Jordan Mason could be the goal line guy. Plenty of upside. If you've built a 0 RB team the way that we have, this is a no-brainer. We're going Jordan Mason here and not even thinking twice about it.
Are you into sports memorabilia? Then BS Collectibles is your one-stop shop for all things autographed. Whether you're looking to buy retail, stock up wholesale, or dive into the thrill of memorabilia breaks, BS Collectibles has what you need. Check out their retail website, join the live streams, or take a shot with the Fire Factory Mystery Box series and take your collection to the next level. BS Collectibles, whatever it is, we bring the fire.
All right, we are back on the clock in round 12. This is pick 114 overall, and we have officially reached a stage of the draft where there's pretty much only one question that you should ask yourself with each and every selection that you make. And that question is, in a regular week of fantasy football, meaning not bye weeks, but in a regular week of fantasy football, is there a scenario where this player that I'm considering drafting realistically going to be in my lineup? Okay? That is the reason, that question is the reason we won't even consider a quarterback or a tight end. It doesn't even matter who's available here. We're not going to play them over Lamar Jackson. Doesn't matter who's available at tight end. We're not going to play them over George Kittle. It's just not going to happen. So it doesn't make sense for us to waste valuable bench space on guys that pretty much have no chance of making our lineup unless one of those guys gets hurt. And I'll tell you what, if Lamar Jackson gets hurt, that's going to be a huge dent in my season regardless of who is at quarterback. At that point, I'll just pick somebody off waivers. I don't want to waste my valuable bench space on somebody who will not crack my lineup unless something happens to one of my guys. So, in this scenario, it does create a little bit of an interesting situation, an interesting dilemma, an interesting decision for us here in the 12th round. And here's why. I thought I was at a point where I would only be taking running backs the rest of the way, but I gotta tell you, it was just announced not long ago that Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. That's not necessarily a godsend for Michael Pittman, but we do know that Michael Pittman splits with Anthony Richardson at quarterback. Not pretty. Okay, so it's at least a boost in the right direction for Michael Pittman. And the question I could ask myself here, because he is one of the top wide receivers or top players available in my best available tier, the question is there a realistic scenario where Michael Pittman finds my starting lineup in a normal week of fantasy football? I wouldn't say it's likely, right? We have Malik Nabers and CeeDee Lamb locking up the first two wide receiver spots. And at the flex, there is a window, there is a conceivable path where Michael Pittman would be in our lineup. Maybe it's a week where DJ Moore and Stephon Diggs have a really tough matchup. We don't really like what we see for Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren, Jordan Mason's matchup. There is a scenario in which drafting somebody like Michael Pittman makes sense here. However, I am going to trust that the expensive draft picks that we made, right? We spent our very first two picks on a wide receiver. We had 3 wide receivers within our first 5 picks. I am going to trust that those guys are going to be in my lineup more often than not. And where we've already talked about we need work and we need to beef up our roster and we need to have options that we can consider when using the 2025 week winner, I am going to continue and finish this draft by stocking up on as many upside running backs as I possibly can. Now, when I say upside running backs, I mean something specific. And what I mean is up to this point, and this is going to sound, this isn't going to be something new. This is going to be familiar to you if you listen to either of my most recent 2 episodes, right? 2 episodes back, I talked about my draft strategy for each position, including running backs. In my last mock draft, we got to this scenario where I talked about how my focus on running back changes at this point of the draft. So, up to this point in the draft, we have been looking for guys that can make an immediate impact in our week 1 lineup. Are they an option for week 1? And right now, all of our running backs are options, right? Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren, kind of Jordan Mason. Those guys are options for week 1. However, we are now getting to a spot of the draft here in the 12th round where our focus on running back is going to shift to a different type of profile. Okay? You'll see the top guys, according to Sleeper, J.K. Dobbins, Zach Charbonnet. Those are guys that you wouldn't feel terrific about rolling out in your lineup in week 1, especially in a small, shallow league like this. Instead, we want to start shifting our focus to running backs that make for terrific bench stashes in case things break right for them. And there's usually 3 types that I'm looking for. Number one, and probably the least likely, is pass-catching running backs. Guys like Austin Eckler, who can just get me some cheap points to fill a gap. Okay? The other type of running back that we're looking for is a running back in an ambiguous backfield. Guys like the guy who was picked 3 picks ago, Javonte Williams, right? That Dallas Cowboys offense is in flux right now, particularly the backfield. We don't know if it's going to be Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders, their rookie Jadon Blue. So targeting a backfield like that can pay dividends. For example, last year's Chargers, a lot of the fantasy football community was torn on J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards. And if you pick J.K. Dobbins, which was in the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th round, that paid off handsomely because J.K. Dobbins had the best year of his career. He finished as an RB2 in fantasy football. So targeting those ambiguous backfields and just getting at least one piece of those ambiguous backfields, that is something I want to target in the late stages. The third profile that I'm looking for, and this is probably my most commonly targeted profile that I'm looking for at this stage of a draft, is other people's handcuffs. Okay? So Zach Charbonnet, for example, maybe he creates his own standalone flex value, but more likely he comes into fantasy football value if something happens to Kenneth Walker. And if something happens to Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet becomes an instant high-end RB2 with RB1 upside. Okay, so those are the types of running backs I want to target at this stage of the game. Think about Zach Charbonnet, but also think about Ray Davis if something happens to James Cook. Think about Trey Benson if something happens to James Conner. Rachaad White if something happens to Bucky Irving. I like targeting Jalen Wright this year if something happens to Devon Achane. I like targeting Roshan Johnson if something happens to DeAndre Swift. Will Shipley if something happens to Saquon Barkley. Those guys who carry a ton of upside if something happens to the guy in front of them. Okay, so to recap, we're looking for pass-catching running backs or running backs in ambiguous backfields or running other people's handcuffs, running backs that come into big upside if something happens to the guy in front of them. Best case scenario, sometimes we're dealing with running backs that check 2 of those 3 boxes or all 3 of those boxes. Okay, so we're going to skip this tier of Justin Fields and Michael Pittman. We're going to reach into this next tier. I do like J.K. Dobbins and Zach Charbonnet. It's the sort of thing where both guys could create their own standalone flex value and become options in our quote-unquote weak backfield. But they're also the type of guys whose upside goes through the roof if their backfield mate goes down, right? If something happens to RJ Harvey, that's going to be big news for J.K. Dobbins. If something happens to Kenneth Walker, that's going to be big news for Zach Charbonnet. Think about guys that would be the number 1 waiver wire pickup if something happened to the guy in front of them. If something happened to Kenneth Walker, you know Zach Charbonnet is the number 1 priority for everybody, okay? So we're going to go ahead and take J.K. Dobbins with this pick, and we're going to keep the train rolling, and I'm telling you right now, from here on out, we're going to be looking for running backs that fits one of those 3 profiles. What's up, my fellow fantasy football freaks? Would you like a monthly opportunity to win an autographed NFL jersey of your choice? That is exactly what you get as a member of the Basement Brood Fantasy Football family. Just by being a BBFF subscriber, you're automatically entered into our drawings and contests every single month. And trust me, these giveaways are the real deal. For example, Brian Beaver won our NFL Playoffs contest in January and took home jerseys signed by Drew Brees and T. Higgins. In February, diehard Seahawks fan Isaac Zart won our Super Bowl predictions pool and chose a retro blue Seahawks jersey signed by JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. In March, Greatest Show on Turf Rams fan Mark Vandaloo won our March Madness brackets and chose an old school Rams jersey autographed by their all-time leading receiver, Isaac Bruce. And that's only the beginning. In the last 12 months alone, we've given away jerseys signed by Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Derrick Henry, Tyreek Hill, Alvin Kamara, Earl Campbell, Amon Green, and a lot more, all courtesy of our friend and partner BS Collectibles in Twin Lakes, Wisconsin. So if you love fantasy football and you want a monthly opportunity to add an amazing autographed jersey to your collection, Join the BBFF family today using the link that we left for you in the description of this episode. All right, we're back on the clock in round 13, which makes this pick 127, and we're just going to keep this train rolling. You already know the plan. We are looking for upside running backs that we can stash on our bench, guys that we're hoping become options in our weekly lineup, but ultimately these are guys that we're trying to maximize the upside, that guys that become high-end RB2s or even RB1s if things break right and something happens to the guy in front of them. Now, I scrolled down a little bit to the tier where a bunch of these types of profiles, a bunch of these types of running backs exist in the 2025 Draft Dominator, right? Jadon Blue is a part of the Dallas Cowboys ambiguous backfield, and he's a bit of a pass catch, like he's a threat out of the backfield as a pass catcher. You got Tank Bigsby, who's looking more and more like he's going to be the starting running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. That is going to be a no-brainer pick for us here. But you also got Tyjae Spears, who's injured, but largely expected to split the backfield with Tony Pollard. We're gonna stay away from Tyjae Spears. I'm not going to be taking two running backs from the same backfield. You can rewind 2 episodes if you want to hear my philosophy and my take on why I will never take a handcuff. I'll never take 2 running backs from the same backfield. You're only capping your own upside there. It's nothing but negative correlation. Trey Benson I really like as a target. If something happens to James Conner, Trey Benson becomes an instant high-end RB2 with RB1 upside. Same thing with Ray Davis if something happens to James Cook. Same thing with Rachaad White if something happens to Bucky Irving. Heck, even Najee Harris, we got to figure out what's going on with that eye and what's going on with that injury, but if something happens to Omarion Hampton, Najee Harris is far from sexy, but he can get the job done. Bashal Tootin is a guy that I like as a late-round rookie flyer. I do have to move Tank Bigsby up a bit in my next update of the Draft Dominator, which I'm doing tomorrow. But those are the types of guys I'll be targeting here coming down the line. And even if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a lot more. Austin Eckler, Jerome Ford, Braylon Allen, Dylan Sampson, Isaac Guerrero, if anything happens to Christian McCaffrey, Roshan Johnson, who we'll stay away from because we already have a Bears running back, Jalen Wright, who I mentioned earlier, Tyler Algier, if something happens to Bijan Robinson. Basically, we're just going to start picking these guys off left and right. We're going to start this thing off with Tank Bigsby because his ADP is flying through the roof at this point. All right, so after I picked Tank Bigsby, there were literally no other running backs that came off the board. So I'm going to take my next best running back, who's Trey Benson. Plenty of upside here if anything happens to James Conner, who's a guy that we wanted earlier in the draft anyway. So we're going to go ahead and take Trey Benson. We'll see what other running backs fall. Jadon Blue went, Tyjae Spears, Najee Harris. So some of these other guys came off the board, but we're still going to have plenty of options. Now, one thing I want to call out, you'll see I have 2 draft picks left, right? We're almost done. There's only 2 picks left to go, and I still got 2 empty spots, a kicker and a defense. Now, if you've watched my stuff in the past, then you already know where I'm going with this. But if you're new to my stuff, first of all, welcome, and thank you for tuning in. But if I don't have to draft a kicker, if I don't have to draft a defense, especially on August 19th, and we're still a couple weeks away from the start of the season, if I don't have to draft one of those guys, if there's not some sort of like league rules or you have to leave your draft with a minimum of X amount of position, I don't bother. I'm not going to waste precious bench space, especially on August 19th when there's still preseason games, there's training camp, injuries could happen. Instead, I am using those final 2 bench spots on a much more valuable pickup, like continuing to stock my bench full of upside running backs. Then, once week 1 finally does roll around, that Sunday morning or possibly that Saturday night, I am just going to drop my 2 worst bench players or move one over to injured reserve, by the way. Like if I want, I could take a last round flyer on Christian Watson, stash him on injured reserve, and then go grab one of these upside running backs that we talked about targeting. But I'm going to drop my 2 worst bench players right before week 1 begins. And usually when I say worst, by the way, another trick for deciding which bench players I'm going to drop is a lot of times I like to look at what percentage rostered they are on Yahoo or on Sleeper. If they're like 1% rostered, I'm going to drop them because there's a chance I can just pick them up after waivers run again the next week. But what I'm going to do once it's time to pick up my kicker and my defense, I'm just going to pop open that week's week winner, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Click over on the streamers and stashes tab of the week winner, and simply you'll see over here I have streamer options for defenses, streamer options for kickers, streamer options for tight ends, quarterbacks if you need them, and I'm just going to plug and play one of these defenses right off the waiver wire, throw them into my lineup, and collect the double-digit points. In fact, last year, myself and BBFF members, BBFF subscribers, we had a really, really fun experiment, really, really fun project going where I was doing this research to try and identify kickers that would score 10 or more fantasy points in their upcoming game. And we did find some really unique trends that people started betting on and banking on, and it paid off. It literally won people championships last year. So that's the type of analysis you get access to if you're a member of the Basement Brood Fantasy Football family. But the point is, when I'm down to 2 more picks like I am right now, I'm not wasting my spots. I'm not wasting my space on a kicker or a defense that I'm going to end up dropping in week 2. Instead, I'm going to finish filling my bench with upside running backs just in case something happens to the guy in front of them over the next couple weeks, considering it's only August 19th. So, all that being said, I think the next one I wanted from the Draft Dominator was Ray Davis, right? I don't have James Cook? Correct. So we're going Ray Davis here. I haven't been updating this because I know we're at the end. Jadon's gone, Spears is gone, Benson, Ray Davis. Wouldn't mind getting Rashad White if he's there. Let's check back in 1 minute. Eckler went, so Rashad White is available. So we're going to wrap it up with Rashad White. And that is going to do it for this mock draft for Alex. To recap, we have Lamar Jackson locked in as our QB1. We have George Kittle locked in as our tight end 1. We're not even going to think about quarterbacks or tight ends. We're set. We don't even have to think about those guys for the whole rest of the year. We got CeeDee Lamb and Malik Nabers locked in as our wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. Same thing. We're not even going to think about taking those guys out of our lineup. We're set there. At running back, we're going to have some decisions that we need to make every week. But we also have a lot of options, and that is beautiful because we can start to play situations, we can start to play matchups, right? When you have Lamar Jackson, George Kittle, CeeDee Lamb, Malik Nabers anchoring your lineups, getting you those terrific points, those elite points every week, all you basically need from your running back room is to get you enough. Just check the boxes, right? You don't need Christian McCaffrey weeks out of your running back every single week. But we're going to have a lot of options here. Chuba Hubbard, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, Jalen Warren, Jordan Mason, J.K. Dobbins, Tank Bigsby, Trey Benson, Ray Davis, Rashad White. Think about what happens with these 3 guys if anything happens to the guy in front of them, right? James Conner, James Cook, Bucky Irving goes down. Suddenly these guys become high-end RB2/RB1 that you just plug and play into your lineup all week, every week. Okay, and then at the flex, we're going to have a lot of options here between DJ Moore and Stephon Diggs and everybody else that I just mentioned. Okay, once the time rolls around where we got to make some of those decisions at the flex or at RB1, at RB2, I'm just popping open the week winner for that week, clicking on the analysis for the player that I'm interested in, and I am making my decisions there with confidence. And even still, if there's ever a scenario where I just can't quite decide, I did all my research, did all my analysis, looked at my own rankings, etc., 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 and I just can't quite decide and I want to get a second opinion, I pop over here to Basement Brood Fantasy Football's Discord server, and I slide right into the Start Sit channel, and I ask my question, hey guys, hey gals, I'm thinking about starting this player, that player, this player. What do you guys think I should do? And the BBFF family, the BBFF community chimes in. It's dozens of passionate fantasy football players in here that are friendly, they're good people, and they're just in here helping each other out. You're going to have dilemmas. You're going to want a second opinion on things. We have second opinions in here, third opinions, 10th opinions, 69th opinions. We got anything that you could possibly need in the BBFF Discord community. Hey, fantasy football kings and queens. Want to show off your drafting skills and perhaps even dunk on me in the process? When you join one of my exclusive best ball leagues over on drafters.com and use promo code BBFF, you're going to get a 100% match on your first deposit all the way up to $100. That means if you put in $10, Drafters will throw in another $10 for free. If you put in $100, Drafters will throw in another $100 for free. It's basically free money to play fantasy football with all the way up to $100, and that's not all. When you join one of my leagues, you're also going to get $10 off an annual membership to my small but mighty business, Basement Brood Fantasy Football. So not only do you get free money from Drafters, but you also get a sweet discount on your membership to BBFF. It's already a win-win, and that's without even mentioning the cash prize and the bragging rights that you win if you come out on top. So join our latest league using the link that we left for you in the description of this episode. Use promo code BBFF and join me on the fantasy football field. We'll see you there. All in all, I would be thrilled if my draft went this way in the real world, in real life, right? But I do always like to take a quick second to reflect and think back about if, is there something I would have done differently, could have done differently? If there's one thing that gives me a little bit of heartburn, maybe I'd switch out one of those running backs for one more wide receiver closer to that Michael Pittman, a little earlier than that Michael Pittman range. But ultimately, that is a coin flip. It's a 50-50. I'm more than fine with how this turned out, and I'm more than fine with getting one more wide receiver. But that's pretty much the only change, right? If I were to make the change, it would be one less running back, one more wide receiver, and that's a 50-50. I'm totally fine with how this worked out. That's going to be all for today's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode or any of my content really, it would help me out so much more than you know if you just smash that thumbs up button, leave a comment in the comments letting me know what I did well, what I did wrong, how terrible of an analyst I am, whatever you want. Also, be sure to subscribe to the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss out on future episodes, and of course, the best possible way you can support Basement Brood Fantasy Football is joining, signing up, becoming a member of the Basement Brood Fantasy Football family. It's just $69 for an entire year, which I promise you is less than one night out to dinner. That's all I got for you guys. I will see you on the fantasy football field. Cheers. This brew's for you.